You're watching Global Trade This Week with Pete Mento and Doug Draper.
Good morning and welcome to another edition of Global Trade This Week. I am half of your hosting cast. My name is Doug Draper, coming to you out in Colorado. And we have a fill-in again. Keenan, this has been multiple times in the last couple of weeks that you filled in, so it's great to see you again. So Keenan's my co-host. What's going on, my friend?
Well, we just came out of a Memorial Day weekend, so celebrating the service of the veterans as well as summer, people getting outside. I know this is often a time where pools start opening and even roads start opening in Colorado. There was a little bit of delay because of snow coming in that kept like Independence Pass and things that would normally be open by now are not open, but they'll be opening soon enough. And for those of us that enjoy the snow, we'll take the extra little bit of it for as long as we can.
Yeah. Well, we were talking before the show started, and your classic Colorado weekend, right? You skied at A Basin, which for those of folks that aren't listening is a resort that always stays open really late into the spring. And then the very next day, you're mountain biking in Carbondale. So you checked the box of classic Colorado this weekend, Keenan.
Absolutely. Snowboarding, mountain biking, camping. It was a great time. Happy to be outdoors with some friends.
Yeah, good. All right. Well, let's get this party started. We'll let you kind of roll with the first topic.
Absolutely. So starting off here, wanted to ask the question, why are oil prices so low? You know, we have plenty of geopolitical tensions, including the death of the Iranian president on a helicopter under mysterious, foggy circumstances. That following Israel having attacked high-level generals and people of Iranian military rank within an embassy in, I think it was Syria. So there's those sorts of tensions that you would think would increase the price of oil, but there's been so much news. Oil's not that high. And one of the articles and pieces I was reading about this from The Economist, they were saying that OPEC, you know, the cartel that produces and sets quotas for themselves of how much to produce so that they can act coordinatedly and get a good price for their product. Apparently, some of the member states have not actually been following the quota. I had never heard of this in my studies of economics or just following news. It seemed like they had a pretty good control over themselves in order to maximize the profit. But if different groups have different cash needs or whatever the situations are, or maybe they're just not able to monitor it. Maybe the countries agree, but then on the front lines, the companies and the people aren't following the rules. And so it seems like they're pumping more than they had told themselves in the world they were going to pump, which supply and demand, right? Increased supply lowers the price. Another major aspect The Economist was talking about was that America is producing record amounts, and America is not a part of OPEC, right? And so we're on the outside producing more. That also causes prices to go down. Something else I was reading about last week outside of The Economist, I think someone within CAP had shared the story about something I hadn't heard on mainstream news. Maybe you had heard more about this, but Ukrainian drones flying into Russian territory to hit oil refinery capacity. Apparently, they've knocked off a significant percent, like 12 or 15%, I believe I read, of the refining capacity, which then is leading Russia to sell more of the crude on the market. So lowering the price of crude and then shifting that profit of the refining process over to non-Russian countries. So I hadn't heard of that outside of just that one story that came across my desk last week. But that could also be playing a factor into it. And then also The Economist is talking about, you know, interest rates aren't coming, or inflation's not coming down fast enough for the Fed to really consider dropping interest rates and kind of encouraging economic growth that would then increase a demand for the oil. So all these factors kind of coming in shows that we're going to be on cheap oil for the near term, right? And even more near term, another story impacting this, I don't know if this has begun yet, but I've heard that President Joe Biden was considering selling a bunch of U.S. strategic reserve gas to kind of keep prices down low, kind of counter the narrative of inflation as eating everyone's economic well-being, because, you know, it's an election year. But those sorts of things don't last forever, right? You can sell from the stocks, but eventually you're going to run out of that, or eventually you have to refill it. So that does have a role, especially I think I saw on the East Coast of America, but that force is probably smaller compared to the larger forces of OPEC not sticking to their quotas, which was a new one that could be interesting if there's maybe some divides or tensions or just individual economic incentives leading that cooperative pact, that cartel pact, to no longer act in a coordinated fashion. So interesting updates. So it looks like we have low oil prices for now. Any thoughts on that? Any parts of those or anything else that you've heard about this?
Yeah, so I didn't hear about the drone situation, so I can't really make a lot of comments on that. But I'll talk about, we always say no political, but I'm going to dive into it for 2 seconds, right? So let's forgive student loans so we can get the younger demographic vote. And let's make sure there's cheap oil so we can get their parents as they go on family trips this summer. So interesting that those two things are happening.
Absolutely.
But the OPEC
Why
thing,
now? Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Perfect timing. Uncoincidental, I'm sure.
Right.
So the gist of your topic there, right? So a couple things that I'm just going to keep it super simple. In the article, because I did check out that article that you sent to me, literally they call OPEC a cartel. Yeah. Right. And that's
what it is. Yeah.
Yeah. We've spoken about cartel is essentially the mafia here in America. And it looks like Iraq, Kazakhstan, and Russia have been the biggest offenders of, hey, we'll control our output. And then they blow it up and proceed more. So here's my take on that, right? Cartel equals mafia, right? Dissent equals family war, because there is dissent going on in the cartel because not everybody's acting together, right? And what happens when people within a mafia family aren't aligned? There are always some war. At least this is how the script goes in movies, right? And then if there's a war, it makes for good TV. And I'm not saying there's going to be a war. I'm talking about internal strife within the organization. So I don't know if that's going to be good, bad. I mean, the good now is it's keeping oil prices down, but what happens when the biggest offenders are Iraq and Russia, right? If you look at good guys and bad guys list, you know what side they're on. The only thing I could think of that this would happen is that if this situation changes and everybody falls in line, there's going to be hoarding. People are going to hoard that they can on the lower prices, and that's going to drive up prices, right? So it's interesting. I don't know. In my adult life, I don't know if you've ever heard of OPEC having internal conflicts like this. So should be
same. It could have always been happening, and we never heard about it. But this is the first time I heard about it, and we've been looking at OPEC since I studied economics and different things. And yeah, that's while the C in OPEC doesn't stand for cartel, it stands for countries. It was defined as a cartel, as a small group acting in coordinated fashion for their own mutual group benefit, right? Making the pie of their profit larger by working together. But yeah, it seems that, and thank you for mentioning the countries, seems like some of the countries aren't playing by their own rules, which then means their strength is diminished as an overall group, combined with the fact that there's, high interest rates, so economic growth isn't going off unchallenged, demanding more and more oil, and America is producing more and more than ever before, which also kind of diminishes the OPEC clout, even if they were coordinating together.
Yeah. Well, you just described every mafia movie from the 1980s, specifically the Gambino family. I mean, if you listen to the show, rewind it about 30 seconds and listen to what Keenan just said. And in your mind, picture the Gambino crime family from the 1980s, and they are exactly the same.
Very interesting. So we'll keep an eye on that. What do you have for us for the first topic here today?
Yeah. So it seems like we either talk about electric vehicles or we talk about artificial intelligence like everybody else in the world. But the one piece that I have seen is, so this topic is about the AI applications in logistics, right? And we've talked about how the logistics industry is still disconnected because there's a lot of players involved with moving your cargo and your freight from point of origin to final destination here in the U.S. Forwarders outsourced to individual drayage companies take it to consolidators and deconsolidators and the whole 9 yards. So there's a lot of disconnection. But I think we're not quite there, but this AI could be the piece to, bridge some things together. Because before it was individuals inputting data into a common platform. Sorry, it was still a human that had to do something to get it into a platform that provided that synergy. Well, now the AI and the robots are taking care of it all, right? So Manhattan Software had a conference a week or two ago called Momentum, and they were just firing off some things that are applicable in our industry. So I'm going to go through a couple of them, right? And this stuff is super valid, right? So they can bounce. So there's AI out there that can bounce a discussion and requests against like regulatory issues, right? So I want to do this, but I don't know what the regulations are because I'm shipping it from the United States into South Africa. And AI can bridge the fact like, hey, you can't do that, or you can't ship it that way, or you need this documentation in order to be compliant, right? It could also be the same as you're crossing states. So the compliance factor, right, is huge, that you don't have to have that tribal knowledge. Obviously, you can clarify languages for international trade. You've probably been on emails. I certainly have in my day as a working for freight forwarders where it's 2 a.m. and you're trying to communicate in real time and the language barrier is a little bit disjointed. So I think that's going to be huge. Another smaller one that Cap Logistics is familiar with is best ways to route oversized loads, right? Like what's the best route to get from point A to point B? You needed an abacus and maps and everything else to figure that out. AI can do it in 2 seconds, right? And then I've seen a lot of things, and this will be my last comment. Old school brokerage negotiations, right? You got a driver trying to negotiate a price, and I'm sure people have seen some of these things on YouTube where literally artificial intelligence is negotiating, clarifying, even saying, I got to go talk to my manager in the back office to sell you this car, right? And the fluidity of the conversation, if I didn't know better, I would think it was two humans communicating. So that 5 or 10 minutes at the back and the forth, I think AI is going to dramatically reduce. And I think C.H. Robinson, I don't know all the details on it, but I think they're dealing with email requests on quotes. So a lot of that mundane stuff is going to go away. So AI applications, I think, are going to see real world change in logistics, and it will be a significant start in diffusing or fusing together a disconnected supply chain. So I don't know. It's a lot of information I just spurged out there. What do you think?
A lot of information, but very relevant. I think a lot of us, whether a listener is in a shipper type situation or you're within the transportation industry, we see a lot about AI on a daily basis that, we use ChatGPT or things like that as a personal life, as well as companies using it to market. We've talked about the Gartner hype curve before, where maybe people ignore something or don't know about something, then they get overexcited and get really, really excited about it. And I think maybe we saw some of that in 2023, where yes, the big top 6 or 7 type tech companies were doing quite well with their AI programs and investors rewarding them and building up NVIDIA and Microsoft even more, Google to higher and higher heights. But outside of those, a lot of the companies that were talking the most about AI on their earnings call actually underperformed. And so then I think that led people maybe into a little bit of a trough of disillusionment of, oh, AI, it's wrong. And, right now, I'm not sure if you're seeing these memes, but in my circles, as Google is rolling out their Genesis AI to the regular search function, people are taking screenshots of just horribly wrong information that is being presented at the top of Google, right? Maybe this is some people fishing for funny screenshots, but, I was seeing one of, women should smoke 5 to 10 cigarettes per day during pregnancy, according to X, Y, or Z, right? And it might have been referencing a joke comment on Twitter or now X or Reddit or something like that. Or there's there's some mistakes happening at the beginning, and some people might think that, oh, AI is overhyped and it's not going to be there. But I think to your larger point, it is a very powerful tool. And in something like logistics, where there's a lot of different factors and some clear-cut rules that can be done over and over and over again, AI and machine learning generally, even outside of the ChatGPT style generative AI, is going to be used to help, I'll have my robots talk to your robots, right? Save how many emails, how many phone calls, how many filling out of forms. That being said, other people are concerned about, replacing people. And I think you're already seeing that with things like, robot ran locations of McDonald's and things like that. Cap Logistics is definitely using AI and investigating how we can use it the best. I think we're looking at more of how can we empower our humans who ultimately have the experience and the authority to make a complex decision of how to get a big heavy piece from point A to point B very quickly. Though the more we can use AI to inform, learn from our own internal data, recent shipping prices, take into the account of latest trends in oil and gas prices, all those sorts of things, we're going to be seeing it. So just a reminder for us and for anyone out there that there's often these curves of people don't know anything about it. People get really excited. People start poking holes for good reasons of where it falls apart. Pregnant women probably shouldn't smoke 10 cigarettes per day, according to the best science out there. But Google's AI apparently was reporting that. I think I tried to recreate that one and it looks like they fixed it. So I think that's kind of where we are, right? Is like you test it, you put it out there, and then you find out, oh, this route didn't work or this thing is an issue. And then you address that. And at some point in the future, there won't be those issues anymore. And it will be very, very reliable and work 24 hours a day. So something definitely to keep an eye on. I think it's a very fascinating space, and it'll even tie into my second topic after halftime.
Yeah. Well, as long as the technology can start impacting the bottom line sooner than later, right? If you get all this hype and you talk about all this cool stuff, all right, implement it. Did it save us or make us money? If that doesn't happen relatively quickly, you're going to see some of these larger companies that embrace the tech is either going to be punished on the stock market, or they're just going to abandon the whole thing until it's a little bit more evolved. But anyway, well, that brings us to halftime, Keenan. I'm going to introduce it, and then I'm going first because I think our halftime stuff dove better together if I go first. So as we always say, halftime's brought to us by Cap Logistics. That is Keenan's employer. He can hold up his paycheck for this week, and you can see it says, I don't know if it actually says Cap because you guys have so many holding companies over there. But anyway, we want to thank Cap Logistics for the show and for providing us with halftime where we can talk about whatever we want. So, Keenan, we just changed our topic like 1 minute before the show started. So I want everybody to know that I do have a second child. His name is Will, but I seem to have been focused a lot on my daughter out there. And she is now on a trip, a 19-day trip in Europe after college graduation. And so this theme is basically perception isn't always reality, right? And so she's in Paris and she took a picture of the Eiffel Tower, and that's all fine and good. And literally this morning, because I heard my phone beep about 3 a.m., she took a picture. They went to see the Mona Lisa, and she had her arm up and was taking a picture. And I don't know, I'm sure, have you ever seen the Mona Lisa? I've never seen it in person.
I've never visited. That's in the Louvre, right?
Correct.
In France?
Yep.
Yeah, I've never been.
So she's there. It looks like it's in its own room and it's behind glass. But the picture I just sent to you, right? She's probably 7 or 8 rows back. The place is wall to wall people. I bet there's 75 to 100 people in front of her. Everybody has their cell phones up in the air, so you can't see anything because their arms are blocking it. And it's crazy. You think you go into a museum that you and I see in the movies or things that we've been to, here where it's a lot of open space and you can walk around and you can pause and look at the art pieces. And there she is in a jam-packed room with everybody in their arm in the air trying to take a picture of the Mona Lisa. And she's probably 50 feet away from it, right? You can barely even see the picture unless you zoom in. So I will be interested to see how many perceptions and realities when she goes on her European trip with all the famous things that you and I and our listeners would normally go and see. So anyway, perception, not quite reality, at least at the start of the European vacation for my daughter.
Absolutely. At least cell phone cameras these days do have better zoom than 5 or 10 years ago. So if she wanted to, she could zoom in and get a decent shot. But that is indicative of our times. That painting particularly is so famous, and so many people want to put it on their Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, or whatever people are into, that they're all doing the same thing, holding their cameras up, trying to take the photo. Perceptions versus reality has often been a thing for Paris and France in general, though definitely more so in 2024 than ever before. I think I remember hearing as a child that Japan, the country, had a phone line set up for Japanese nationals who would visit Paris and then so frequently be discouraged by how dirty it was or different compared to how it was portrayed in movies and films and art that the Japanese had seen in Japan, that there was a lot of depression, so much so that the government set up a phone hotline. I'll see if I can fact check this, but I remember hearing that as a kid, like, wow, that's crazy. But if you expect it to be clean and picturesque and movie and romantic, there's romance and coffee there, but there's also, people from a city or, challenges ranging from homelessness or crime or whatever the situation is. And as bad as it was to warrant the Japanese phone line a while ago, I imagine those forces are even larger today here in 2024. So perceptions versus reality is a theme that transitions over into my topic here for halftime. Many of you may have seen there's been lots of news articles going around about a new study looking at the health effects of the paper straws. Now, this is something I'm usually reading about. I like reading about health science and environmental science and specifically endocrinology and endocrine disrupting chemicals. So I'm excited that it's getting more conversation. The last couple weeks, there's been more studies about this, both microplastics being found in testicles as well as these straws, where the perception is, oh, we need to switch away from plastic straws to save the environment, use less plastic. And then kind of the assumption is like, oh, well, if it's good for the environment, it's probably healthier for me too. And yes, there are problems with plastic. Don't get me wrong. I try to avoid it because there are phthalates and all sorts of things that mess up your endocrine system, which impacts both men and women of all ages, but especially the younger ones or not even born people. But as bad as phthalates are for an unborn child, an adult can clear them out with the liver. And, if you stopped drinking out of plastic straws, eventually your body would clear that out. However, these paper ones that have been branded as the more environmentally sustainable thing, in order for them not to become soggy instantly, they're coated in PFAS, the perfluoroalkyl forever chemicals that also endocrine disrupt, but by their nature of being perfluoro, they don't break down. Your body can't remove them. So the more exposure you have through your diet, and they're finding with this latest study that's making the rounds that it does get into your food with a little like, oh, I'm eating out of a paper tray from a fast food joint. That grease is probably soaking up some of that stuff that will be with you for the rest of your life. And as that gets thrown away, hey, great, we don't have as many plastic straws in the ocean or in the rivers. But now that we have these paper ones, now they're a large source of those PFAS chemicals that won't be broken down and will be a challenge for people in Europe where the study was, but obviously America too, for generations to come. So it's a good reminder for us to manage expectations as well as try to look at the reality because, perceptions, you can imagine, I'm not picking on any particular politician or region, but you can imagine, hey, we're going to ban plastic straws, right? The best of intentions. However, the actual outcome of that good intention turns out to be you're poisoning your water system and your bodies way more so than plastic. Even though plastic is poison, PFAS or paper products are even more poisonous. So it's good for us to do our homework and challenge our assumptions because things aren't always the way they seem.
Yeah, for sure. Well, two things on that, and then we can jump over and I'll jump into my topic and you can end off. But for all of you out there, the word testicles came at the 2113 mark. I'm sure all children have toned out by the 21 mark, but just in case. And then the other thing is that, in an effort to do the good thing, I don't know how many times I've gone out of a restaurant and I have my disposable items in my hand, and it has some funny saying on the thing about compost here, recycle here, whatever. And I look at that. I don't know what I have in my hand. I just throw it in one of the bins, right? So it's almost too many choices to do the right thing. Inhibits people from doing the right thing.
Yep, so. Absolutely. Choice fatigue, as well as I don't know if there's really good options for either. I mean, like people assume, oh, it's paper. Paper will break down. But if they're coated in these PFAS chemicals, they're not going to break down. So it remains. And if they do break down, that means they're just leaching into the water or the environment or then the soil. You wouldn't want to buy city compost, like, oh, free compost soil. You wouldn't want that if it contained these paper products, because then your food would be growing in toxic chemicals that then you wouldn't be able to remove from your body. So pretty wild out there. And thank you for recognizing we did wait long enough. I feel like we cover enough economics topics that children wouldn't be listening that late. And even if they did, I tried to use the proper medical terminology to keep it a family-friendly show.
Nice. Excellent. Excellent. Well, thanks, Keenan, for you and for Cap Logistics for bringing us halftime. So second half of the show, I'll just rifle through my my topic here. So there are a lot of new shipping routes that are going between Asia and Mexico. A lot of this has to do with the 301 tariffs and the fact you can import product in the U.S. under $800. You don't have to pay duties and taxes. So why don't we just set up shop as close to America on the other side of the border and bring things over in bulk, and then just send them into the United States on a transactional basis. So MSC, CMCA, CGM. I don't think you can say CMA anymore. You got to add that extra 3 letters in there. And Costco have all said soaring container volumes and everything are driving there. But the key thing here is that there's also investment into Mexico by China, right? And so they're setting up the facilities and the ports and the infrastructure and all those kind of things to enable these routes, which are gaining in popularity into Mexico. So the import bookings into Mexico have skyrocketed. And oh, by the way, the Chinese are investing into Mexico. So my final take on this one, Keenan, is yes, that is a reality. It will continue to be a reality for, and we better look out because China is no longer across the pond, but they're across a bridge within a golf shot of the United States of America. And they are investing, they are facilitating it. And the consumption of the American consumer is going to fuel that. And so it'll be interesting to see how this evolves. But it will continue to be a trend. A lot of money's coming from China. And I think we should be careful of what we wish for and what we're consuming that's driving that trend.
Absolutely. I feel like recently we talked about the trade stack between Mexico and Canada, and Mexico becoming a larger exporter to the U.S. So U.S. imports more dollar value goods from Mexico than Canada, where it often had been Canada. They've gone back and forth, but it's now more so than China as well. And that speaks to your point, too, where China's, among other countries, a part of that now accelerated nearshoring trend. Not only is there more stability than in the past with the USMCA and some of those tariff regulations of under certain values, there's less barriers and you can have smoother transactions. It happens every day. The infrastructure is there. I think a lot of companies are also wary of the price spike that we saw during supply chain disruptions during COVID, where a $1,500 container from China to the West Coast suddenly cost $32,000, $33,000. That breaks business models, right? And so companies are, in their self-interest, trying to retain their access to labor to produce the goods and be geographically close enough and geopolitically allied enough that they're not going to be shut down. We're not getting into it with the topic, but there were stories about military jets flying around Taiwan and those sorts of things, right? So mainland China, along with companies from Europe, are manufacturing factories in Mexico. But think about companies in Taiwan. They're looking to make factories within the US or in Mexico in order to make sure that they're not going to be cut off by a literal blockade that would stop their islands from trading. So there's a lot of those forces. This trend had been going on for a while. And I think like many other trends, it was accelerated during the era of pandemic COVID and subsequent policies, and then all the knock-on effects from those policies into the supply chain. But we've definitely been seeing that at Cap Logistics. Lots of customers are interested in Mexico, Canada as well. But there's a lot of interest in our neighbors, and we'll be seeing that. It's also interesting that it's Chinese companies as well. So who knows what's going to happen? I know we're not taking political sides necessarily, but covering what impacts logistics and economics in general. Biden had announced some pretty hefty tariffs recently on China, sounding a lot more like Donald Trump type rhetoric, where I think it's 100% on Chinese cars. Were you telling me about that? And batteries?
Correct.
Significant, right? That's a significant amount of tariffs, and who knows what's going to happen in the future. Either way, whoever gets elected or as things heat up towards the election. But we could be in a world with a little bit more rising protectionism. And with that, that's even more force to have factories located near your end consumer. So Canada or Mexico, or even the United States itself, if you're looking to sell to those three countries.
Yeah. Well, we'll see what the unintended consequences come to be. So
that's right. Yeah, that's right. A lot of people write stuff with their best intentions, but they don't always do the homework, and they don't always check to see how it's going on. So
yeah,
that is a common theme.
Yeah. All right, brother, take us home. What you got for the final topic?
Yeah, so final topic is AI and Europe's power grid. I had mentioned in a recent episode where I was filling in about the heavy energy usage of these AI data centers. Specifically, a single ChatGPT search costs a lot more energy than does a Google search, right? And now Google is incorporating AI technology into their searches. So I know it's not on every search, but what percentage of the large number of Google searches that happen every day are now going to be done with a little bit extra energy in order to run these AI models? Now, there are more and more efficiencies coming into these models. If you saw the ChatGPT or the OpenAI announcement of GPT-4o, that does use significantly less energy. So maybe there will be some gains like we've seen with computer hardware, the classic Moore's law of doubling the transistors every 18 months at the same power level, right? But then are we going to max off? Or right now, what Goldman Sachs is reporting is that they're expecting, like we were talking about in America, even more so in Europe, where Europe's power grid is older, aging, but there's also a lot of demand and or companies, startups, companies, established companies that want to be using the power of AI for their operations. You can imagine it from social media type companies and tech companies to larger industrial companies that want to be using this. There are first mover advantages, so people are trying to get these things rolled out, and that is increasing energy demand quite significantly. Maybe it'll become more efficient, but it seems like this is a pretty big spur for increased energy demands. And like we mentioned last time, they're also going to be cognizant, or often will be cognizant, of how it looks to investors and regulators. And so there's a lot of pressure for it to be clean, whether that's solar panels or nuclear, whatever the case may be. There's going to be more demand for that, and we'll see. There's going to be a lot of business. I think Zero Hedge and Goldman Sachs were looking at it from the perspective of what stocks do I buy. They're looking at different companies that are selling the shovels, right? Selling the parts and the pieces to then upgrade the power grid within Europe. So obviously we don't give financial advice here on this show, but it's interesting to watch and see how investors are looking at these things, whether they're right or wrong. Who knows? Maybe it'll dramatically take less energy in the future, but there may be just a hard baked limitation of, no, yeah, we're pretty efficient, but it's going to take more energy. And if people start using these AI services more and more and more, that creates more demand. So for better or worse, there could be positives of having organized demand looking for cleaner sources of energy that then could create projects that couldn't have done otherwise. But we'll be looking and probably helping customers out in improving the power grid, not only here in America, but Europe as well. So like all of our topics, many different parts of that. So feel free to comment on any part that stood out to you.
Yeah. Well, the one you alluded to it just 2 seconds ago, and we've talked about this before, the pick and axes. If you're selling, the analogy is, people can go out and make money when they mine gold, but people that can make as much money are providing the picks and the axes and the things within the mine in order to mine the gold, right? So I think the same thing will apply, is that, all right, there's a heck of a lot of infrastructure that needs to be built, infrastructure that looks exactly like what's happening now, and also infrastructure that can actually generate and use less power, right? You alluded to that a little bit. So I think if you are looking for investment, and again, we don't give any advice, but companies that are providing the picks and the axes to power generation companies and infrastructure is going to be a hot market in the future. But we're eating it, like you said in your last show, the hungry robots. It'll be interesting to see. So crazy times.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Speaking of crazy times, that is it. Our time is up for this week of Global Trade. Keenan, thank you for filling in for Pete. Really appreciate that. And we're excited. I think the next episode is our 150th. So we'll have to,
oh, wow. Yeah.
Not this one, but the next one. So we'll have to do something special, clown hats or something. I don't know what, something with 150, but we appreciate, whether it's 150 or episode number 1, we appreciate everybody listening to us and engaging with Global Trade this week. It's our pleasure to come and talk about things that interest us. And I think that's it. So this episode, it's a wrap. Keenan, we'll check you later. Okay, man?
Sounds good. Thanks, Doug. Thanks, everybody.
All right. Take care.